Excellent. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll move on. So the whole idea is if you can brainstorm some things on your chart that you've drawn, and then as I go through the images, as you see an image, maybe note it in the accurate box you think where it fits, and then we'll come back to it at the end, have a little discussion. So this is really to engage with some of the initiatives that might be happening that will and could impact the teaching of your lessons in HPE. Sorry, it's not. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to stop there, and if you can brainstorm some other things that you may have seen that fit into that box. Just give you a few minutes for that. Okay, so what did everybody think about that? What were some of the key takeaways? If you could use the chat option here to just note some things that you noticed, you saw, that you may not have known about, or that you have seen but haven't really looked into, that could be included in your practice for HPE. So I'm going to jump into, as a past leader and teacher, and just note something that I would find very useful. Any other things that stood out? Thanks, Monica. UNICEF and the WHO. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for those responses. I think when you actually go through it, and when I started doing this, and that's not everything, when you actually start to compile what is happening in this area, there is so much happening because health and PE is so fundamental to people's general well-being and health, but sometimes it's forgotten. So there's some really great things in there if you go back once you get the presentation and just have a look in there. So the movement guidelines are fantastic text publications for your students to access to. Even when they're younger, you can actually unpack the early years movement guidelines, which incorporate now sedentary behaviour and sleep as a health literacy component, and then you can use the older movement guidelines 5 to 17-year-olds as well with your students. And there's a whole range of other resources in there, and some I didn't put in there from the health departments. Often we don't go to the health department resources, but lots of great things within there. So that was just a provocation really, just to invite you to have a look and just see what else you could use as well as your students. Now, are there any questions so far? Just have a bit of background noise from someone who may not be on mute, but that's okay if you can put it on mute. Thank you. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so we have the music's still playing in the background for me, Sonia. I'm not sure how to get that off.
I can't hear any music.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but no music.
But not the music?
No.
Okay, that's good. I'll try and keep going because I can hear the music running in my headphones, but that's okay. So we'll move on here. So this is the cube of the 3 dimensions of the Australian curriculum. So you can see you've got the cross-curriculum priorities at the top here that are obviously encouraged to be embedded. The 7 general capabilities to be embedded where relevant and authentic, and of course the learning areas. So obviously focusing on HPE today. So if you go onto the website, which I'm going to flick through in a minute, it has a whole range of the background information and obviously a good video if you'd like to watch that, just to remind yourself of the rationale. It's an excellent future-focused rationale, and you'll see that evidence through those propositions and key ideas. So I'm going to flip to the website just to remind you where that information sits. So that information is sitting obviously under HPE, Health and Physical Education there, and under the search engine there you have how it works, and so you do have to go into these boxes separately to access all of that information. So you have the rationale and the video. Really good to remind yourself about that rationale in the video. The aims, which we'll show you in a moment too. The key ideas or propositions, as they're called, really important characteristics of the that underpins the whole structure, and we're going to talk about that tonight. Then you have your structure, which we'll also go through, and the PDFs, which I'm sure you're familiar with. One thing about the PDFs also is really important is to, if you are printing those off, the focus areas are really important to make sure you have front and center with your planning too, just to find those connections. Then you have your glossary. So this is obviously really important as well. If you're not sure of the verbs and the terms or context that are used within the curriculum for HPE, you can look up what they're talking about there in the glossary. And that's really all there. So you can see it's a little bit hidden. You just have to use that drop down box. Any questions about the website structure? It's not always really explicit about where that information is. So I just wanted to remind everybody about that. Okay, so moving on. So the aims of HPE. Just going to get you to have a look at this as I scroll these through. Really get you to think about if you are in a classroom or going to be in the classroom and or other learning space. How is this facilitated within your space? If you're in early years, how is this working from the early years learning framework into the Australian curriculum? And what else can be done? Can you see there's a whole range of very rigorous opportunities for our children to obviously look after themselves and develop a healthy lifestyle for themselves, but others and their community as well. And the aspects of health and physical education as you go through are all interrelated, not so easy necessarily to achieve that interrelated concept in your planning, but really need to try and think about those possibilities there to interrelate the strands. But that's just simply from the website, which you can access, and or you'll get a copy of this as well. So if we have a look at those propositions, focus on educative purposes, take a strengths-based approach, value movement, develop health literacy, and include a critical inquiry approach. So these underpin the entire curriculum and are really important to consider when you're planning. So not just going to the content and the standards, but also thinking about these propositions, those aims, what are we trying to do, how does it align to these propositions? If we look at educative purpose, this is what we're referring to. So that explicit learning about health and movement, being intentional, purposeful about what we are learning about with our children, learners, students, and how we are making that visible to them in the classroom and the learning space or area. So the bottom point as well is really important. They're offered and provided with multiple opportunities to practice, create, apply, and evaluate what they have learned in health and movement contexts. So a strength-based approach. So ACARA refers that to developing the knowledge, understandings and skills they require to make healthy, safe and active choices that will enhance their own and others' health and well-being. But it also affirms that we acknowledge that all students and their communities have strengths and we need to nurture those strengths, and we focus from a strengths-based approach, not a deficit model where we're trying to fix a problem. We use their strengths to then build their knowledges in health and movement contexts. Value movement, that's quite obvious, but it's important to look at the definition of that proposition. So we want our learners to be able to develop competence and confidence for ongoing participation across their lifespan. We know that this can drop off if they don't develop that confidence and those key fundamental movement skills, and also promotes an appreciation of how movement in all its forms is central to daily life. So this proposition here, there is the definition there on the left, but it actually is broken down into 3 dimensions: functional, interactive and critical. So developing health literacy is an individual's ability to gain access to, understand and use health information and services in ways that promote and maintain health and well-being, again for themselves, others and their community. And some people may argue that's a bit difficult with young learners, but working with young learners in early years, you can definitely achieve this, but it just looks different to some of the work you may do with your older learners. So if we unpack those dimensions, we're looking at the functional dimension, researching and applying information relating to knowledge and services to respond to a health-related question. The interactive dimension, so it does state there, it requires more advanced knowledge, understanding and skills to actively and independently engage with a health issue, but you could still modify and adjust that for your early learners. And the critical dimension. So we don't have enough time to go into those dimensions, but it's really important that you recognise the dimensions that make up that proposition too, and a good reflective point for you in your practice and planning. Then another proposition is to embed a critical inquiry approach. that assist students in researching, analysing, applying and appraising knowledge in health and movement fields. I'll let you read the rest. So this is where I was going to show you these cards. So the questions from the beginning of this PowerPoint actually came from this pack of cards. So they can be purchased through the ACARA website. And what they do, if you can see them here, is they actually unpack every proposition. But the power of these cards is on the back, where the authors, Karen Lambert, Justin O'Connor and Dawn Penny and Laura Alfrey have actually established some key pedagogical and instructional questions, I guess, for your practice. And they're really, really useful. So don't think they're expensive at all, but I really suggest grabbing a pack of these off the ACARA website because they're really, really useful in terms of those propositions. Sometimes without them, we may forget about them. So there's something I have on my desk all the time, front and centre, just to remind me as well when I'm presenting how we're supporting our stakeholders engage with those. And I'll go onto the website just to show you. So if we click here. So we don't endorse any resources, but through ACARA, this is a really great one that I highly recommend. And I reference a lot in my presentations. So if you can you see that, Sonia? Excellent, great. So if you, I'm showing you this, these are not where you purchase the cards from, but you can purchase them off the ACARA website. But this, if you Google Monash 5 proposition cards, they actually have a series of videos in relation to those propositions, and they're really, really useful to watch as well if you have any time. It's quite challenging to get your head around those propositions, but definitely something I would suggest. Maybe pick 1 or 2 and just do a little bit of research and have a look at those videos there which relate to the cards that I just showed you too. So very, very useful to engage with that. Are there any questions so far about those propositions? Because they're often asked by myself or ACARA that, you know, or it's an observation that we need to still support our teachers with understanding those propositions and how to embed them. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions, otherwise I'll keep moving. Oh, sorry, can I just ask, are you all hearing that music, the background music? Sonia, are you hearing the background music?
I can't, but I know that others can. I'm not sure where this comes from. Is it in your office?
No, it's in the PowerPoint, but it's it should just be, I should just be able to mute that. It often just mutes, and that's what I'm having difficulty with.
Not anymore. We've got some comments here.
No, because I'm actually that's because I've flipped to the internet. I'm just gonna, let me just see if I press that again. See, it's back on now. And that's, I'm trying to, apologies everyone, I'm just gonna have to.
Yeah, it is quite soft, so it's not too loud.
Apologies everybody, I'm gonna just try and get this. Don't know why it's doing that. It's very frustrating, it shouldn't be there. Sorry. Is that?
It's still there.
Yeah. Can you hear me though, or is it really distracting?
Yeah, your voice is quite clear. It's relaxing music, so it's all good.
Sorry.
Not really disturbing.
All right, I'll keep going, but just let me know if it's a real problem and I'll stop. So we'll go through the...
Yeah, it's not distressful.
Okay, thank you. Okay, apologies.
Sorry, I can't chat. I don't know why I can't chat on tonight.
You can't chat.
Yes, I'm trying. I'm going to everyone.
Oh, okay. Do you want to just jump in and ask a question if you need to? through your microphone. Would that be
Yeah.
okay?
I've been trying to chat to and bring up my name, but I don't know. And it says my internet's coming in and out. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Apologies for the music. Maybe a little bit of mindfulness as we go along. I don't know how I'll fix that. So we'll go into the structure. So the F to 10 here, so you'd be familiar with this, with the strands, obviously, personal, social and community health and movement and physical activity. Have the sub-strands and the focus areas. So as I mentioned, really good to print off those focus areas and definitions or online just to see the connections with the tagging there as well. So I've added this slide just to remind ourselves about the role of the focus areas. They provide breadth of learning across the F to 10 structure that must be taught. So I often get questions about why don't we teach that, and often it is included and connected through the focus areas. It's just not explicit in those broad content descriptions. So you'll see these codes here, A, D, F, N, they will come up in the elaboration codes. So that's what they are in the brackets. So the structure again, and again, just to get your head around things, you have the strands here. The sub-strands are these here. So I move my cursor over them. And then the bullet points are the threads, because it can get a little bit confusing when you're referencing that when you're looking at your planning and the PDF documents. And again, here I've just put a note at the bottom from the website that they are interrelated and inform and support each other. So where possible in your practice and your setting, depending on your resourcing and teaching time, I guess, is thinking about how we do that in our schools. Can we work with other teachers or generalist teachers to help us in this process if you are a specialist? So here I've just screenshot the page from one of the PDFs. So you can see this is the sub-strand, the strand, and these are the threads down the side. So that gets a little bit confusing if you don't get your head around it, but there's the strand, the sub-strand, and then you have the threads that are along the side there. And so I've captured this in a table myself because it's just nice to actually look at the threads at a glance, because it's just really good to have a look at and reflect on how are we doing this in our planning, what may be our gaps, what are the opportunities here for that interrelated nature. And interesting, I'm not sure why, but we don't have a thread of making healthy and safe choices in foundation, nor health literacy, valuing diversity and cultural significance of physical activity. As an early years educator, I would say we should, but that's just an interesting observation, and you could definitely and would definitely probably do that anyway, especially extending from the early years learning framework.
I do that, making healthy and safe choices.
Sorry, that's just cutting out. So I'm just going to go into the tagging. So I'm going to jump on the website here and just show you that concept of tagging, which can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'll select 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Some of you may be really familiar with this, or it may be something that is too overwhelming and you ignore, which can be understandable. So you can see in the online version, so this is where the tagging will occur online, is you have the content, sorry, I'll minimize that again. So you have the 2 strands obviously there and the achievement standards. If you drop down here for the personal, social and community health, you will see the general capabilities are tagged to the content descriptions there. And if you click on them, they will have a range of suggested links to literacy, general capability, critical and creative thinking. So you'll get familiar with the symbols if you do use these. But I just want to advise that for one content description, we acknowledge that there are many tags. And so I would suggest, as you'll see later, is that you choose what is absolutely relevant and critical to your practice. And it may be a scope and sequence you have in your school and or for your year level that you've decided. But don't put the pressure on yourself to cover all of those tags, because you're just going to get the breadth. We're not going to get the depth and rigor we're looking for, but they are definitely suggestions. So I know a lot of schools are focusing on this capability. And so they're really looking into, say, using that tag. Now, personal and social, I think you're going to find that you're doing that quite well anyway with those tags. But I just want to point out, be mindful about how much you're trying to cover with the tagging. In the elaborations, which are non-mandatory, they are suggestions. This is where you will find some other suggestions with general capabilities, but this is where the focus areas are tagged. So if I look at mental health and well-being for that content description, there are suggestions, there are the links of how that elaboration to that content description is tagged to the focus area of mental health and well-being. So again, I wouldn't put pressure on yourself to think you're covering all of this, but these are just provocative thoughts, I guess, and ideas about those connections. So if you're asking yourself, well, how does this content description link to those focus areas? You can have a look at the elaborations. So it's very strongly linked to mental health and well-being. And then we also have, let me see here, health benefits of physical activity and active play and minor games. So are there any questions about the tagging? I just think it's really important that I emphasize not to put pressure on yourself to cover all of those tags, but they are simply ideas in terms of elaborations, but they do show the alignment with focus areas there, which then broadly will align to that content description there. So sometimes when I get inquiries, how does this link to something? It's often because people have forgotten that the tags are there and or it's actually quite overwhelming on the website. So if you have any questions now, you could use that chat function about the tagging and or any challenges you've found with that, or opportunities, because there's lots of opportunities, but you just have to find a manageable way of dealing with that. And or feedback for us, because we're always open to accepting feedback. I know from teaching in the classroom, it's just link after link after link. Yes, I know. The design of the website could definitely be improved, but we have sent out surveys and we are discussing that constantly in our team meetings. So it's definitely something I constantly raise. How can we support teachers more through the design of our website too? So thank you for sharing that, Melissa. Okay, I'll keep moving because we've got a little bit to get through. I'm just going to see, maybe if the music may disappear if I use it in this format. Are you okay if is everyone okay if I use this view? Because the music's gone. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with this. Apologies for that. Okay, so the tagging, okay. Content descriptions. So I don't need to read off the screen for the next two slides, but I have included for your reference. And again, this is embedded in the website, but I just thought I would pull this out from it for you. And this links to any learning area, but obviously the content descriptions is what is to be taught and students are expected to learn. The achievement standards are the learning expected of students at each level or band, and they're often obviously structured in two paragraphs. So the first paragraph describes what students are expected to understand, and the second describes what students are expected to be able to do having been taught that curriculum. So I always talk to teachers about, you know, just being mindful, have your students had multiple opportunities to show what they know, understand and can do before we're going to assess them. And also being mindful that those achievement standards are supposed to be judged by the end of a year or band, understanding that you have to report twice a year. So we did a lot of work in my school about what are we assessing in relation to that standard in relation to what has been taught. So we don't tell you how to report and assess, but those achievement standards will say what is expected at the end of a band or year level in foundation. Jump in if you have any questions about achievement standards and reports. We always get questions about the 5-point scale, but we don't advise on that because that's not within our remit. But it's always good to think about how you manage this in your school, especially with the bands, and how those children are being given multiple opportunities to show what they know, understand, and can do before being judged. So this is just an example of the knowledge and understanding. So this is the foundation achievement standard. So that's the first paragraph. Second paragraph is about the application, able to do. So that was just a little reminder. Now I'm going to move on to embedding the cross-curriculum priorities, and I'm only going to talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures here. So if you're not familiar with this priority, there are key concepts and organising ideas. So we have the key concepts: people, culture, country and place. And I'll show you on this slide here. So you can go into this on the website and you'll access all of this information again, but you have country and place, which is the concept, culture, concept, people, concept, and there are 9 organising ideas for this. So there are opportunities in HPE for this to be embedded, and this is directly from the website too, but I have chunked the advice here. So I'm just going to let you read that. I'm going to move on. So you can see here they're making connections with those concepts. I'm referring it to health and physical education. So often people will think, well, okay, how do I do this so it's not tokenistic, etc. So there are some suggestions, not all, but there are suggestions on our website through the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Histories and Cultures tab. There are illustrations of practice. I'm going to go and show you where that is. It's always very handy to revisit. There's actually 2 ways you can get into this cross-curriculum priority. So you can go from the curriculum overview drop-down box. You can access all that information there, and right at the bottom, so there are the new science elaborations here and advice, plus the framework. But if you go into illustrations of practice right under there, and in there, you will see here, and I have referred to in my PowerPoint, the Sanderson Middle School illustration of practice there. And I'll go back to show you what you could do on your own with an activity there. But that's where they're sitting, and you can get ideas from them in relation to health and PE, as well as ideas if you're teaching other learning areas and year levels across the board, how you can embed that. So if we had more time, which I've run at a workshop before, we would have a look at the segment within that illustration of practice that relates to HPE, and it has some dance in there as well. And we would look at these questions. So we don't have time for that tonight, but I just thought it'd be nice to keep that in for you. Rather than you sift through the illustrations of practice, you can go straight into that one and have a look for yourself and use those questions as you wish, or just view the video. But they're really good resources. And so in terms of, I'll come back to this as well, this was just me having a little play. In terms of planning, we don't advise any templates, of course, but you could think of something like this just to remind yourself of prompts when you're planning in HPE. So this box you could use here or there, it doesn't really matter the order. But in terms of in HPE, when you know what aspects of the standards you're looking for in a unit and your related content descriptions. You may want to then also think, okay, well, what propositions are quite evident in my planning and or focus areas? And often we don't think about these two aspects of the structural elements of HPE, but really good to maybe have these prompts on your planner, however that looks. But also here, what general capabilities and cross-curriculum priority links could I embed in relation that link and align to these aspects here in the middle? And then also thinking, well, if we're going to cover this, what practices do I need to embed within my classroom and or resources, etc. So that was just a little slide that I've shown before at a workshop as well. Just really thinking about adding prompts. So depending on what your planning looks like, I highly recommend from experience is if I understand the structure of a learning area, I often put the prompts on my planner. So I make sure I'm not just looking at content, I'm actually reminding myself of the rationale and the other structural features. So that was just something I thought I could share, might be quite useful. So capabilities. So I've talked about embedding some of these priorities and how you can do that in terms of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. There's a whole range of other ways, but that was just a little snippet, and happy for you to contact me if you do want some further support in that, as well as general capabilities. So our advice with the capabilities is we always ask, how long is a piece of string? And what are we looking for? We're looking for breadth, surface level. We're looking for depth and rigor. We're obviously wanting depth and rigor in relevant and meaningful ways. So it's up to you to decide. This may be a decision of your school and or faculty. You may be already thinking about this, but if not, I always say think small. Start small and do it well. Because it's really easy to overwhelm yourself with those capabilities. I mean, if you just look at the list of them, you can embed them in everything you do, but what is it that we're really wanting to get with depth and rigor, and how can we use the resources available on the website to help us? So I would suggest starting small and or going with what your school is going with and faculty or strategic plan, whatever you may be working with, if you are in that space. And if not, and or if you are, have a look at the general capabilities learning area advice. So I'm going to flip back to the website here and go back to, so drop down here, general capabilities here. I'll go to the overview. There's a nice video if you want to read that. The learning continua are all there for the capabilities. And then we drop down the learning area specific advice. And if I go down to HPE, the PDF, it will summarize where in the capabilities those links are. So this is a great starting point as well. If you haven't really delved into this space, it might be good to even just start with this, print that out, have a go, pick a capability and really just reflect on how you're embedding this into those content descriptions and or standards and or other ways of your working in your instruction. And again, they are tagged, but this is just another glance at it generally for HPE, which I think is quite nice and workable and a good, easy reference there. Oh, yes, thank you. The Yalunga resources, thanks, Luke. Excellent. We were just looking at them today with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander curriculum specialists. And that's on the Sport Australia website as well. Is that where you're accessing that from, Luke? Yeah, great. Excellent. I'm just going back here. Okay, so we'll move through. Okay, so work samples are another great resource as well. You can use some, obviously there's a lot of feedback that some are fantastic, some are not so great, but that's okay. You can still, I think, access them and get a sense of some judgments around satisfactory and above satisfactory. There is below satisfactory, but that will eventually be removed, which you can understand why. So these samples as well, you can go into those samples through, probably familiar with this as well, but just in case you're not. So Back to the website, you can go to resources at the top here, at the end, and straight to the bottom, or you can go through the learning area. But if I just go through that way and go into HPE there, you can see that you can search and find your year levels. Let's look at 9 and 10 above satisfactory. You can open that up. You can read the portfolio summary. So this is a portfolio, a collation portfolio of work, and this portfolio explains what it is, and the bracket refers to the work sample. So that aspect is evident in work sample 2 and work sample 3. This sentence is in reference to work sample 4 and 5 and 6, which is all captured. And if we go into a sample, you can see, you can make this bigger, that it will highlight. You can make this larger, but if you scroll over the work sample, it actually annotates aspects of achievement and things that have been observed. These annotations are not a repetition of the achievement standard wording. They are written so you can understand and break down that achievement standard in other ways, not just copying and pasting the wording from the achievement standard. And we're looking at, per sample, aspects of the achievement standard. You're not going to be assessing everything in an achievement standard, and even within one paragraph for one piece of work. So being mindful of those assessment principles, and you can use the function of view and compare. It's not a good, yeah, here we go. So for this sample, you can look at the above satisfactory piece and the satisfactory piece side by side. And you can also view the annotations and observe the similarities and differences as to why that is above and to why that is satisfactory. So they are good to reference and use for your own professional learning with assessment too. And when I run some workshops, I often talk about how these work samples can enable and facilitate that assessment literacy conversation. So thinking about looking at the tasks on the website, but can also then foster some thinking about your own tasks. So is my task fit for purpose? What are my questions? So are my questions eliciting the evidence I'm looking for in my tasks? And often you can easily critique our work samples too to make them better, but that's not a bad thing if you're using that as that critical reflection point. Being really clear before you assess and judge and set your task. What evidence are you looking for in relation to those aspects of the standard? So use these questions when you're designing your own tasks. Understanding that before you're going to assess a task, you need to understand and unpack the achievement standards. And what are you looking for in relation to what has been taught, as discussed previously? So really being really clear what you're assessing and ensuring your students have understood what they have been taught as well and are going to get assessed on. And then this is something I've done before as a teacher. I found it really useful. If this is what I'm looking for, I pop my aspects of the standard there. I then brainstorm before I set my task. What am I looking for? What will I look for to be able to make a judgment? And often what happens is we plan the activity first before doing this. So this is a really good thing and a good habit to get into as well. So this is just information about the work samples. I'm going to skim over this because you can read this when Sonia shares the presentation. And at a glance, obviously, using work samples can really just check in with your own assessment literacy. And we've all had various experiences with access to high quality assessment professional learning. So these are some good things to think about and good ways you can, like I said, you could use ours and critique ours and then apply that to your own practice. Now, if we had a workshop and I was face-to-face, we could deconstruct a work sample. So I've chosen a dance one before in a workshop. And I've had a follow-up activity here. So again, I'm going to leave this for you to use or not use. I quite like this work sample because it is capturing a group task, but you are able to collect evidence on all of those children just by that one task. So they don't have to be assessed individually to capture evidence. And it also talks about a unit of work in the background information. So quite a good task. And there's a whole range of different abilities within that same group. So I quite like that example. But again, you could look at that, use these questions, and then you could obviously use these questions to apply to your own tasks. So we have 5 minutes, so we're on time because I'm just going to go through some other resources that are available. Some curriculum connections, and I'll show you where they are. So these are connections that really show connections across learning areas. So the two that are great for HPE is there is food and fibre as well, but they haven't actually been linked to the content descriptions of HPE. But you could definitely use the food and fibre curriculum connection. I'll show you where that is. But we have food and wellbeing and outdoor learning. So they provide multiple pathways to search, access and organise content to support a progression of learning in relation to conceptual themes. And when you go into them, you can have a look at how that's done across learning areas, but you can definitely have a look at food and wellbeing in HPE. And you can have a look at the dimensions within food and wellbeing. And we have outdoor learning. And they're talking about skills and knowledge, human nature relationships, conservation, sustainability, and health and wellbeing. So really great as well, extending from the early years learning framework if you're in early years. And so I'm just going to go over that. I'm actually going to show you, I'm going to use the website for the remainder resources. So we have here, so resources. If you move to the end of that tab where it's resources publications here, you'll see curriculum connections. So this is where they're all sitting. So as mentioned, food and fibre, you can easily relate, but there aren't actually explicit links when I last checked to HPE, but food and wellbeing and outdoor learning do have those. And then it will come up with the rationale. There's always a safety consideration and advice around them, but you look at the dimensions and the structure of that curriculum connection, and then you can explore your content. So it's really, this is just for your information to have a look at if you have time. The literacy and numeracy learning progressions, they all have learning area advice. So in HPE, you can go in there. And so there's a great document there as well that you can reference. And I would suggest if you are teaching in primary or early years, you can just apply page 1 and 2 to your own practice. But you can see, and 3, as you move on from year 8, they actually give some explicit examples for planning. So shame they didn't do that for the earlier years, but I had to go, and it's quite easy to do for younger years as well, especially if that's something your school is looking at. And similarly, you can do the same for numeracy learning progressions, view learning area advice, HPE, and you come up with this document. So some general broad principles at the beginning that you can apply to any learning area. This is a great chart, which was on the literacy advice as well for planning. And then this is from year 10. It actually gives you explicit examples of those numeracy links there. So go back here. That's just a reminder there. So in HPE, there's explicit mention of interacting, listening and discussion. You're doing that anyway, so you can actually have a look at what that looks like on a progression of learning from F to 10. And then, as we said, the numeracy as well. So before we finish off as well, just a reference to ACARA. If you're not a member, obviously they have great professional learning opportunities as well, and readings and articles to access there. So I work closely with ACARA as well, as supporting them as a stakeholder. So I'm presenting at the primary conference coming up as well on Monday. So that's just a really good support tool as well that I thought I would mention, as well as all of those national, international and state-based initiatives that I showed earlier on. And I think that takes us to 6 o'clock. Sorry, there was a lot of talking. There's a lot to get through. But before, obviously, if you have any questions, you can use the chat function here. I'll stay online for the next 5 to 10 minutes if you want to. And or in your own time, you can email me on that contact email on the slide. And Sonia will share the presentation. But thanks, everyone. And thanks, Luke, again, for suggesting the Yalunga traditional Indigenous games. Actually, if you can stay on, I could quickly share that screen with you because I was on there today for the Yalunga. So if you can't stay on, thank you. But if you can, I can show you the physical literacy. So if you have the, so this is the physical literacy page on Sport Australia. And you can see at the bottom here, so they have obviously the research and the domain information there if you're interested. But here at the bottom, the learn more, if you can see, you have the playing for life activity cards. They're really useful and they're aligned, or they should be becoming aligned to the Australian curriculum. Sporting schools initiative. So if you are in a role and you are not using sporting schools, you could have a look at the information there to get your school involved in that program. And then the traditional Indigenous games there are the Yalunga games. And so you can see there, it gives you some information how to use the cards. And then you can search all these types of games. So let's just click tag games, K to 3, 4 to 6, and search. And you'll see it comes up with a whole range of Yalunga games there. And if you're to open up one of those games, it gives you the background information, how to play it, and then some other games have variations as well. So, yeah, there you go. You've got the variations, teaching points, etc., gameplay and basic rules. So they're a great resource. Thank you, Luke, for sharing that. So there we go. Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely evening and feel free to, I'll just put that slide up again. Feel free to contact me if you would like any further support. I can't come into schools, but I can definitely respond to your inquiries. And if you have any other inquiries for ACARA, you can contact ACARA on info@acara.edu.au for any learning area, and someone will get back to you with a response.